Excuse me, is your name Charles Leclerc, aka modern day Jean Alesi? We're arresting you on suspicion of committing crimes against Formula One, of having potential unfulfilled, and being a serial offender as far as unforced errors by frequency and of material consequence. Now, of course, I say all this tongue in cheek, but this is a serious thing. The undertones are very serious because Charles Leclerc's career is a wasting away in real time. I've said on a gazillion occasions, that dude is far too brilliant. His future far too bright to be making the mistakes that he makes. Both the frequency of them and the consequence. It's too techie for me at this stage, and we've got to broach it seriously and have an open and honest conversation. Now listen, the Charles Fossey will say, what are you talking about, Cameron? This is PR. This is propaganda. There is an agenda against Charles Leclerc. Well, how can there be? What are we talking about here? What agenda? You guys have seen all the mistakes that he's committed over the past few years in long form, not just talking about this year, where he has been good for the large part of. However, you could argue that since Monaco, he's been nowhere. DNFs, failed to finishes, failing to get out of qualifying. Like, what has he been doing? He's been nowhere. And again, I would be doing Charles Leclerc a disservice if I wasn't to talk so critically of him. To the Charles Fossey, who say this is all agenda. What are you talking about, really? Agenda against who? For what? It's not that deep. This is just objectivity, surely. And you do Charles Leclerc a disservice as far as his uppermost ceiling, as far as you think he may become in future. If you don't talk to this in earnest, I've said a gazillion occasions now that what we will not do on this channel is sacrifice truth and objectivity at the altar of partisanship or anybody's fan base. I don't care. Have to level criticism properly. And again, I think so highly of Charles Leclerc, of his pace in absolute terms, of his potential, what he can become as a driver, not to speak this way in earnest. I would be doing him a disservice. What mistakes are you talking about, Cameron? Well, please see Imola a couple of years back when he spun in the latter stages of the race for absolutely no reason. Poor risk management. Poor Ricard. You remember that one? No, I'm stupid. What are we doing here? That wasn't a mistake. Of course it was a mistake. And what's worse about that circumstance at Paul Ricard is that Charles Leclerc had done the hard part already. The toughest part, the tropiezo in that race, the stumbling block, was defending to Maximilian Verstappen at the start of the race. You've seen that of the other 19 drivers on the grid, only Sir Lewis Hamilton can do that. Charles Leclerc is breathing rarefied air indeed as far as his skill and talent as a driver. That much we can't argue. It would be nonsensical, too disingenuous even. However, it's frustrating to me that in that race, Paul Ricard a few years back, he does the hard part only to then go and stack it and find himself in the barrier, as he has done on so many occasions career to date. Before his Monaco race victory, before he broke his duck, as near as makes no difference, every single Monaco Grand Prix there were a mistake being made, whether it was the pit box shenanigans or reliability. There's always an issue. He crashed at the Monaco Historic for Pete's sake. Oh, that wasn't his fault because of course the car did it. What are we doing? What are we doing, Charles? And those aren't the only two. Baku, you remember. You only need to dial into YouTube Charles Leclerc crashes and you will see compilations upon compilations. There has been load of mistakes from the Monegasque. And it saddens me, I will be honest. Because as at July 2024, what we need is drivers rising up from the ashes like Phoenix to challenge one Maximilian Verstappen. Generational talent. We don't want to see more monotony. And who better to do that than the Monegasque, the modern day Jean Alesi, Charles Leclerc? What are we talking about? We've seen that Lando Norris doesn't have the requisite wheelcraft to manage for Maximilian Verstappen. Not yet. He's too young, too green. Please see as you Exhibit A, this weekend passed round the outside of Lewis Hamilton. You don't put one up the outside of Lewis, not speculatively at least, and not expect to lose a place as he did to another shark in the tank in Maximilian Verstappen that race. Charles Leclerc, however, writes Marcuse, is one of the only ones alongside Lewis Hamilton who has the requisite wheelcraft, the wheelsmanship, the knowledge, the race IQ to race a Max Verstappen properly. Use Max's aggression against him like Steven Seagal Aikido, the F1 equivalent of that. He's got to. You only want to look back to Bahrain in 2022, Saudi Arabia too. He was like a matador to Maximilian Verstappen's bull, and you can't do that and not be God tier. Hence why it leaves me frustrated, even every single time, even more, knowing how good this guy can be in real time, seeing evidence of that, only for that to be usurped, overtyped, transposed by the errors. What are we doing? Oh, and by the way, are we going to talk about assertiveness? He's being astute or lack thereof. We know that Ferrari have a cheeky, unforced error in their locker, just as Charles Leclerc does, aka modern day journalism. So then surely at this stage, Charles, you want to sense check their maths, just as Carlos Sainz does each and every single time. You won't see Carlos Sainz coming in for Inters before time, will you? How about you say, you want me to come in for Inters? What's Carlos doing? Why don't we duplicate his strategy? Because that dude, as near as makes no difference, is never, ever wrong, at least not strategically. He lacks for assertiveness. That's why he finds himself out in Brazil qualifying on Inters before it's even wet. What are we doing? This is nonsense. And again, the frustration for me comes as a function of the fact that he's so good, yet so noddy, so strategically inept, so lacking in assertiveness. I've said for the longest time that in a perfect world, where this is a utopia and you could leverage hypotheticals, what you'd want is to steal the assertiveness, the race IQ, the racing brain even of Carlos Sainz Jr. and transplant it into Charles Leclerc's speed, his raw pace. People say, for the avoidance of doubt, that A to B, he's the quickest of the 20 on the grid. So what are we doing, Charles? When are you going to become? When are you going to deliver on all this potential, chap? That is boundless. We've seen it in real time. But yet and still, your soft, vulnerable underbelly is always strategy and your propensity to make mistakes, unforced errors. Lando Norris said it a couple race weekends back, that the person that wins the race 9 times out of 10 is the one that makes the least mistakes. Charles Leclerc, that is never you. You always make them. This weekend passed. Again, wrong tyre choice. Sense check Ferrari's maths. The Charles Fossey will say he has nothing to do with him. He's not a strategist. Well, listen, if you're doomed to repeat the mistakes of Christmas past, then follow Scuderia Ferrari as if their strategists are perfect. They don't bat 1,000. So that means you need to sense check their maths, just as your teammate Carlos Sainz does. And let me say this, because this is important. If Charles Leclerc is as good as the Charles Fossey think he is, then why is it always so close between him and Carlos Sainz Jr.? Carlos Sainz Jr., no one in their right mind would argue is anywhere near as fast as Charles Leclerc. It would be disingenuous, nonsensical to argue that. So why is it always so close between them? This season, Charles Leclerc has a race on Carlos Sainz Jr. by virtue of the fact that this chap, the Spaniard, the man from Madrid, had his appendicitis surgery. But yet and still, how is it so close in the championship between the two? This makes no sense. If I speak to Charles Fossey for a second, the reason why they love him, of course, is because he looks like Clark Kent, a superhero of sorts. But you know what? In real life, there is no such things as superheroes. They don't exist. Heroes, they say, do not wear capes. Charles Leclerc and the Charles Fossey need to understand this in real time, and he needs to have an honest and open conversation with himself fix for his iniquities in his ineptitudes, even, with a view to become the driver that we all know that he can be. What are we doing here?